Hi everyone. So about a week ago, I attended my grandmother's funeral. She passed away about 2 weeks ago, and her funeral was last Saturday. And as a result of that, I've been thinking a lot about death and dying, and also the Mormon plan of salvation, which I plan to make a separate video on. But I wanted to talk about what my thoughts were in relation to the funeral itself first, and then also death, dying, and the afterlife now that I am no longer a member of the LDS Church. So there are two moments in the funeral that particularly stood out to me. Well, one in the viewing and one in the funeral. In the viewing, of course, my grandmother was dressed in her temple clothes, having been endowed in the temple. And when they were ready to seal the casket, they put her veil on as well as the rest of her temple clothes, and they put it over her face. And I don't know if they were instructed to do that by anyone from higher up in the church, or if that was just what was easier to do rather than lift her head and put the veil behind her head. But that was what was done. And of course, that reminded me of going through the temple myself, having my face veiled when I prayed and so forth. And now, of course, that's not done anymore in the temple as far as I know, but it just made me think of the associations I have with that, which are not completely good, and make me feel that women are oppressed within the church. However, knowing what my grandmother believed, I don't think it would have bothered her to have her face veiled within her casket. And so I can't fault the people who did it. It's definitely very complicated watching the funeral proceedings of somebody who believes very differently than I do, because on the one hand, there's what I would have liked, but then I know what the person herself would have liked, and so I can't fault people for doing what she would have wanted when she was alive. I think that it's actually a good thing that they're doing what she would have wanted when she was alive. So it's something that gives me conflicting emotions, but not overall negative emotions, if that makes sense. And the other moment I want to talk about during the funeral service that I thought was particularly interesting and kind of describes how I feel in certain ways about the whole experience is when we sang the opening hymn, I guess, for the funeral, which was "Be Still My Soul." And that hymn became very emotional for me at that point, because I felt that a lot of the things that were said in that hymn I now no longer have faith in and have serious concerns about, even potentially, although I still tried to sing it. But that made it so that it was difficult for me to get through the hymn, because in a way, more so than grieving my grandmother, I was grieving my loss of certainty that certain things would work out in particular ways in my life and in my eternal life as well. I don't have a belief that there's a God watching over me who's going to make sure that certain bad things don't happen in my life. At least if I don't do bad things. I don't have a belief that everything's going to be completely fixed in some afterlife. And that makes it very difficult to listen to and even try to sing a song that's based on that belief that I had in the past. However, obviously, the experience was not about me. It was about my grandmother, and I believe that that is what she would have wanted. So, once again, the whole experience was about what she would have wanted, I hope. And I think that that's important. I think it's important to give people the respect that they deserve when they die, especially when they've lived a life according to their principles, which I believe my grandmother did. And so, although I have my own thoughts on different parts of the funeral, particularly the plan of salvation talk towards the end of the funeral, which I'll get into in another video, I thought that on the whole, it was what my grandmother would have wanted, and so I appreciate the people who went through all the effort to make that funeral what it was. So moving on now to my thoughts on death and dying in general as a former member of the LDS Church, specifically as it relates to my grandmother. This has given me a lot of chance to reflect on what I think about the potential that there might be an afterlife and what my hopes are for not just my grandmother, but for my parents someday and for myself. Obviously, I would like there to be an afterlife. But, of course, believing as I do now that the LDS Church isn't true, and knowing that if there is an afterlife that exists for everyone, my grandmother has passed on to that afterlife, I'm left with some interesting thoughts and interesting concerns about what that might be like for her, because I kind of see that there are two possibilities here. Either she is allowed to continue in her belief that the LDS Church is true, or she isn't, and she's told that it isn't true by somebody who is managing things there. And either one is sad in its own way. I think not being told the truth would be more sad ultimately, but in the short term, it would be very sad to be told just after dying that the church that you devoted your life to wasn't true. I think it would break her heart. And so that's something that I am somewhat worried about, to the extent that I think an afterlife might be possible. One of the things that has given me a little bit of comfort regarding my grandmother is that she hasn't been fully aware of, as far as I know, of all the decisions I've made in my life recently. And I hoped that that would make her last time in her life somewhat easier if she doesn't know that I've officially resigned. But I think it would be far worse than finding out I've officially resigned, to find out that her whole conception of what the afterlife was going to be and what qualified a person for the highest level of happiness within that afterlife was completely wrong, and she had based a lot of her life decisions on something that wasn't actually true. I think that would be way harder than just thinking that I had fallen from the best that I could have as one of her grandchildren. And so, knowing that there might be an afterlife, because I think there might be, is actually in some ways a bit difficult now that my grandmother, who believed very strongly in the LDS Church, is dead. But on the other hand, like I said in other videos, would I like the option to continue existing after this life if I wanted to? Well, yes, absolutely, I would. And so I have to ask myself, what's better? Not that it matters, because I can't control whether there's an afterlife or not, but is it better to continue existing after this life or not? And I think that depends a lot on what the afterlife ends up being like, if it exists. But I think on the whole, I think it would be better for people to have the option to learn more truth. As sad as it would be to find out that you devoted your life to something that wasn't true or wasn't completely true, I think it would be better to have the chance to know that after you died than not at all. As sad as it could potentially be to go through that experience. Anyway, thanks for watching. I know this was kind of a more somber video, but if you enjoyed it, please like it and consider subscribing. And let me know in the comments what your thoughts on death and dying are, and whether you think there's an afterlife and what you think it's going to be like. And I'll see you all next time. Bye.